Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the November 2025 Pacific Coast Archaeological Society General Membership Meeting. Tonight, we have a distinguished guest speaker, Dr. Tom Dillehay. He's speaking to us from Chile, which is 5 hours ahead right now. The title of his talk today is The Archaeology, Genetics, and Environments of the First South Americans. Dr. Dillehay is the Rebecca Webb Wilson University Distinguished Professor of Anthropology, Religion, and Culture, and Professor of Anthropology and Latin American Studies, Emeritus, at Vanderbilt University. A senior scholar at the School for Advanced Research in Santa Fe, a fellow at the Dumbarton Oaks, Harvard University, a professor titular at the Universidad Austral de Chile. He has carried out many archaeological and anthropological projects in Peru, Chile, Argentina, other South American countries, and in the US, England, and India. His main interests are migration, the long-term transformative processes leading to political and economic change, and the interdisciplinary and historical methodologies designed to study those processes. Dr. Dillehay has been a visiting professor at several universities in the US and around the world, and a Fulbright Scholar in Peru, Chile, Argentina, and Uruguay. He has published 32 books and more than 250 refereed journal articles and book chapters. He currently directs interdisciplinary projects focused on long-term human and environmental interaction on the north coast of Peru and on the political identity and cultural patrimony of the, bear with me on this one, Mapuche in Chile. Dr. Dillehay has received numerous international and national awards for his research, his books, and his teaching. He is a member of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences. Thank you very much for your support of PCAS, Dr. Dillehay. I give you the presentation, give you the floor.
Well, thank you, Joe, for a generous introduction. And thank Steve for working with me to set up this PowerPoint from down here in southern Chile. And I thank the society in general for inviting me. It's always a pleasure to share information with people in other regions. So if you pass me, let's go with share here. And I'm going to go ahead and get started. Can everybody hear me? And okay?
Yes.
Good. I'm going to take you on a tour of South America. And I'm talking about the archaeology, of course, genetics and environments of the first South Americans. Let's see if we can get this. Don't pay any attention to the dates here. I'm just taking this slide to bring you into the Americas and some of the possible migration routes going into South America. And there are at least 3 or 4. One of the more popular ones is, of course, people coming over from Asia, across Beringia, down the coastline, which would include the California coast and the work done by colleagues there, John Erlandson, of course, from Oregon University, all the way down the Pacific coast into South America. And then the older and more popular and still usable, let's say, migration route is the yellow one, coming down through an open corridor in the northern ice sheets, Alaska, Canada, the extreme northern sections of the continental US, down through South America, taking an interior avenue into the continent. And then there are some who speak of one that's coming out of somewhere perhaps in the southeastern US or other portions of the US, moving down through Caribbean area. And then the white one up on the right-hand side, one that is not truly accepted, but a remote possibility at some point, maybe. People coming across from Europe, coming across the northern ice sheets of the Atlantic, down through Newfoundland, east coast of the US. For my purposes, the only two viable ones would be the orange migration route down the coast and down the interior as well. And I don't choose one or the other. They're probably at different times. There were different migration routes, people coming through the interior, along the coastlines, and into South America. And there's the timing issue as well of when. There are some people in genetics and archaeology up and down the Americas, as I'm sure most or several of you know, who take a long chronology, see people coming into the Americas, North America, eventually into South America, 20 to 18,000 years ago. Some proponents would push it even further back, for which there's no really solid evidence. And then there are the short chronology people, a few of them still left, what I call diehard Clovis proponents, who still adhere to 13,000 years ago with the Clovis culture and people coming into North America and rapidly moving down into South America. And I'll address those points a little later. I'm going to jump briefly to the genetic information and get that over with because it's kind of a mixed salad. Depending on the geneticist you speak with, new models are always coming out. Seems like every 2 weeks, not only in the peopling of the Americas or North America or even South America in general. And the migration routes that they follow generally follow what we archaeologists are suggesting, as you saw in that last slide. And of course, the geneticists have to use our archaeological clocks to estimate the timing of some of these genetic changes and genetic movements coming into the continent, the hemisphere as a whole, and the continent as well. But what you see in that middle upper slide, there are a number of haploid group types that are found in North America that never made it down into South America. And on the other hand, there are some haploid group types in South America that, of course, that came down through North America and went into the southern continent. And there are a few other haploid group types down in South America that were created once people got down there. And it's more recently, the two slides to the left and right in the lower portion of the screen, this came out just 2 years ago, are very interesting because they're pointing out some migratory routes of back migration coming out of eastern Brazil and moving up toward Panama. This was later in time, around 8, maybe 10,000 years ago. But most interesting is off on the right. Some of this recent genetic evidence is showing genetic traits of Neanderthals in South America coming through and down through North America into the South. And Denisovans. Denisovans are that Homo sapiens group that migrated up out of North Africa and eventually arriving into Asia. Homo sapiens taking a left-hand turn and going into Europe. So it's very interesting to get at the end of the world, these two Homo sapien genetic traits down in South America, as you see in that lower right-hand corner, with a shared ancestry as too. But like many of the haploid group types and genetic traits that we see in South America, they're shared across the continent, but also there's a big divide in South America where you get the Andes running down the full length the left side of the continent, and off to the right, that massive Amazonian basin down into the grasslands of Uruguay, southern Brazil, and Argentina, the Pampa, what they call Patagonia. I'll talk about that even more. But what we get from the genetic evidence is obviously genetic biological connectivity to Asia and North America, but also the usefulness of it is pointing out these vectors of human movement and suggesting movements geographically that we can relate to human migration in the archaeological record. I personally find that the genetic evidence often is difficult to understand because, and I've published on this and made the comment, and I'll make it again here. Many of these publications in genetics do not always reconcile their recent results with previous results. And there's just a lot of variable information out there that's seemingly a little overly unconnected at times, let's say that. But there's also a lot of useful information. It's a new field, and producing a lot of tremendous evidence that's great when matched with archaeology and geographic information. So let me move into the archaeology. I think all of you are pretty much aware of the debate on pre-Clovis and Clovis in the Americas, although the majority of the people pretty much think that the debate is dead and that pre-Clovis is pretty much evidence in North America and in South America. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that. This just shows some of the classic pre-Clovis, let's say non-Clovis, meaning dating about the same time as Clovis, but there are no Clovis points, and pre-Clovis sites as well. In South America, that there to the left's the famous fishtail projectile point that I'll be talking about, that a number of North Americans see as kind of a technological extension of Clovis in South America. That's a controversial point, however, which I will address in a few minutes. And then here are a number of pre-Clovis sites. You've got in South America, in Huaca Prieta, I'll talk about that in Peru, Monte Verde over on the left-hand side, and a place in Arroyo Seco in Argentina. And there's a scatter of dates. Up in the north, some of these dates may go 15, 16,000 years ago with some of these sites. Some of them are still controversial in North America. Some of them are pretty well accepted as well as pre-Clovis, and pretty much the same in South America. Some are still debated and others aren't. And I will address and look at those. But you pretty much get a scenario here of people up North America, maybe around 15,000 years ago, and at least 14,000 in South America, suggesting kind of a rapid movement from north to south. And that's a questionable model too. So again, I'm not here to discuss the whole peopling of the continent, the hemisphere, nor of, let's say, the pre-Clovis Clovis debate, but I kind of want to just lay it out for you in a general fashion. The connection between the two continents is seen mainly by people from North America, and not all North American archaeologists who are Paleo-Indian specialists, is the classic Clovis point off to the left, and that flute that you see in the base there. Off to the right is the classic fishtail projectile point in South America. In the upper right-hand corner, it would be E, I guess. Yeah, that you see what is interpreted as some as a flute in the base, very similar to what you see on that Clovis point to the left. However, a number of, and the vast majority of South Americans do not see this as a classic flute. They see it simply as longitudinal thinning of the base. When you have the flute of Clovis, you get basal grinding. You often get a platform set up to where you can push or punch that flute off on both sides. only about 92% of that 92% of all the fishtail points out of South America, none of them have longitudinal thinning or what might be called a flute. So that one up here that's an E in the upper right-hand corner is very infrequent. Also, the general form that you see is somewhat different. That's why they call it the fishtail point, with these softly expanding shoulders up above the top of the stem there. So South American lithic specialists, including myself, we don't see the fishtail point related to Clovis, and some North Americanists do see it that way, and that's still a controversial point. And it is the single cultural trait, other than obviously people genetically, biologically moving from north to south into South America, that links North and South or the entire hemisphere. And it's a controversial issue, as I mentioned. So let me move into South America more specifically, and I'm going to take you on kind of a Rand McNally map tour of the continent, starting up in the left-hand corner in Colombia and Venezuela, coming down the Andes and ending up in the Amazon basin. But these are some of the major geographical zones of South America. The Andes corridor, of course, the Amazonian basin, the Brazilian highlands, I'll be pointing out, and also the grasslands of South America, which is like the Pampa and Patagonia in the south. And again, these are some of the more specific interior migration routes. It's pretty obvious that people came out of Panama, and it could be down that very narrow Darien isthmus that you find connecting to Panama and Central America, either again along the coast or maybe through the interior. And some people are speculating the possibility of coming down through the Caribbean area. But there's been a lot of work done in the Caribbean, and there's nothing to suggest any sites that are really early there that would lead to migration of people in South America through the Caribbean island strings. Keeping in mind that when the sea levels were down about 100 meters, that's 300 feet, back around 14, 15,000 years ago, those islands were connected almost all the way up to Florida. So there exists a possibility there. And you can see from one island to the other quite easily back in late Pleistocene times. And then the other possibility, they were coming down the Atlantic side of Central America, the Caribbean side into South America. We don't have any evidence to prove any of that, other than the fact that they had to have come through the Panamanian Straits, down the Andes corridor, into the interior, and again, along the Pacific coast. And I'm showing you where most of the sites are located in South America. I mean, there's hundreds of them, of course, and I'm just pointing out a few here in the Andes off to the left and down the Pacific coast as well. And a number of them over in the Brazilian highlands, that yellowish area with the elbow extended off to the right in South America. And many more down in Tierra del Fuego, southern Patagonia. I pretty much have been to all of these sites and across the continent over the past several decades, seeing the collections, talking with colleagues, visiting their excavations, and so forth. So here's some of the major differences that I see between North and South America. South America, there's less glacial impact on migration. You don't get any glaciers until you come into central Peru and central Bolivia, and that's the central Andes, down to southern Chile. But there were also low passes all through the Andes that permitted movement from left to right, but also pretty much restricted movement. Once you come down that Pacific coastline and the Andes, you're pretty much on that Andean avenue to the south. But once you come into the continent, let's say Colombia, Venezuela, up in the northwestern section of the continent, and you come into the low foothills of the Andes and into the Guyana highlands, which are really hills more than anything else, northern part of the continent, it's pretty easy movement into the Amazon basin. Let me say something about the Amazon basin. Back at that time, it was not the dense forest that you see today, kind of like a green shag rug. Uh, it was parkland, it was savanna. There are even portions that were semi-desert with dunes. And it wasn't until after early Holocene period, after the Pleistocene period, that patches of tropical forest began to spread and unite to create what we know of today as that dense Amazonian rainforest. Uh, a second point is that what you get in North America, let's say like special kinds of flint, like alabates off the panhandle of Texas, that's moved up into the Midwestern U.S. and often found in the far eastern section of the U.S. and other areas as well. Of exotic lithic material in South America tends to move shorter distances in South America than they do in the North. Also, in South America, there are only three notable, well-studied, known kill sites of mastodons, mainly, but also of paleocamelid, what we call Wanako, wild Wanako. Kill sites are just very rare in South America. There must be many more, and there's probably a sampling bias here, but at present, we have far fewer than what you get in North America. What we do get in South America is higher cultural diversity very on in the lithic technology and the economic life ways, the kinds of archaeological sites that are found, cave sites, rock shelters, open air sites, coastal sites as well. So we don't refer to Paleo-Indian in South America. A few people do who were trained in the North America, and they use that term. But what we really call it, proto-archaic, and we call it that because of this cultural diversity and sort of broad spectrum economy and diet that you see in South America, and I'll be talking about that too. And in the South, the Clovis pre-Clovis debate almost doesn't exist. South Americanists, and I'm talking about native South Americans mainly, pay little attention to it, and they see it mainly as an argument that takes place in North America. So let me get started here with specific site material. In the upper left-hand corner in Venezuela is a site called Taima Taima. It's radiocarbon dated around 13,000 years ago, excavated by Venezuelan and North American colleagues as well. And this was one of the few kill sites known on the continent. And off to the right-hand side is the pelvis of a young Gomphothere mastodon. And in that pelvis area, just to the right, let's say on the clock, it would be about 4 o'clock from that tag that's there lying in the pelvis. You see a brown projectile point, which is called an El Hobo point, shown down in the left-hand corner here, the kinds of El Hobo points that you find in Colombia and Venezuela. This site dated at around 13,000 years ago. Some of the radiocarbon dates on it are questionable. The context is not questionable, but the radiocarbon dates are. Although there are more recent sites here recently that date between 13 and 11,000 years ago with El Hobo points, right about the same time as Clovis in North America. Down below is a Colombia site called Tibito, also dating around 13,000 years ago. And here again, some of the radiocarbon dates are somewhat questionable. And there was a large stone that you see here, two of them, at the edge of an old swamp, which today is dried up. And this is a site that was excavated by Gonzalo Correal, a Colombian colleague. And here they found not projectile points, but flakes associated with American horse, and other megafauna around the edge of this swamp near this large stone, which suggests a kill site of smaller game, but not megafauna. This is pretty much what you typically find in some sites in the northwestern part of the continent. However, once you leave the Andes, you see up in this upper left-hand corner here, and you move down into the Colombian tropical forest, which would be kind of the tropical lowlands associated with the northwestern Amazonian basin, you begin to get a tremendous amount of rock art that some colleagues seem to think date back to the late Pleistocene period. It's not dated, the rock art, but what you do find are symbols of animals that appear to be mastodons, American horse that you see in that frame D to the left-hand corner. And these are associated with archaeological sites that are dating between 12,700 to 11,800 years ago. And I'm talking here about calibrated radiocarbon dates. And some of these sites, Peña Roja, Cerro Azul, Limoncillos, and so forth, that are down in the tropical lowlands of Colombia. What is most interesting about these sites is that a lot of them present flake tools, unifacial flake tools. They must be hunting animals, if indeed some of this rock art dates to the late Pleistocene period, but the projectile points at these sites have not yet been found. What is really interesting is colleagues there, such as Tuno and other colleagues who are Colombian archaeologists, often talk about what they call agroforestry, because in all of these sites, a lot of burned palm nuts are found. So, some of these sites contain as many as 15 to 18 species of edible plants from the tropical forest. A few bones are found only if they're carbonized, because the organic material, unless it's burned and found in hearths, is not well preserved in these kinds of environments. Although a lot of the burned palm nuts and other nuts and fruits and so forth are found at these sites. This is a very early indication in the entry into South America of kind of a broad spectrum diet of plants, nuts, fruits, and animals as well. And our Colombian colleagues are beginning to find a number of these sites in the region. So let me come out of Colombia. Let's go down the coast of Ecuador and Peru and Chile. These are just a few of the sites that exist, dating between 14,500 and 12,000 calibrated years ago. There's a number of us who work up on the north coast of Peru, where you find, as you see in the upper portion of this slide, the fishtail point I was talking about. None of these have flutes on them, or what people would call flutes. They don't even have longitudinal thinning as well, made of quartz and rock crystals. And these are dating about 12,800 years ago to 12,500 years ago, associated with springs mainly in the foothills of the Andes and small oases-like areas out on the Peruvian desert coast. These are often associated with a later projectile point that we call Paihan, dated about 11,700 to 11,000 years ago. None of these these sites, there's hundreds of them that have been found, have been associated with killing of large game. Most of them are associated with deer bone, rabbit, wild camelids, again, guanaco, it's called, sort of like the American antelope in size, and plant material. So again, what you get up on the north coast of Peru associated with these two kinds of projectile sequences, fishtail points and also Paihan, are a diet that's broad spectrum again, plants and animals. When you get good preservation, where again, it's got to be carbonized material. This is a site that I've been working at in Peru for past 20 years, Huaca Prieta. It was first excavated by Junius Bird, American Museum of Natural History, back in the 40s. And what you see here, right on the Pacific Ocean. And in late Pleistocene times, the ocean would have been out about 16 kilometers away, 8-9 miles away. You get a scale of it. What you see is an artificial mound here. That mound dates from about 8,000 years ago to 4,000 years ago. So I'm not interested in that mound right now. I'm interested in the terrace platform it sits on, which is exposed here at about 2.5, 3 meters high. We excavated down through this mound, which is 32 meters high, into that terrace. It took us 5 years to do it, and found late Pleistocene material in pre-mound levels on this terrace, which is an old Pleistocene terrace that dates back, a remnant of it, about 100,000 years ago. So here's a trench off to the right from the top of it, and then off to the left-hand side, you see another trench where these individuals are standing, and that is off to the left. The stratigraphy of this mound is like pages in a book. It's incredible that there's no disturbance. They're pretty much intact. And we got down to the level you see on the left-hand side is 32 meters down. As I said, it took several years to excavate this and taking it down. And what we find at that lower level are radiocarbon dates and pretty well intact stratigraphy from 9,000 years ago down to 13,700 in some trenches, and others all the way back to 14,500 years ago. In sequence, the radiocarbon dates. Here we're associated with shells, obviously the ocean nearby, pelican bones, other marine animals, sea lions, crustaceans, but also we have it's a desert, and we have some pretty well preserved bulrush bulbs and other plants from estuaries, saltwater estuaries. So again, it looks like we have a mixed diet. In this case, marine animals and shellfish and some fish, in addition to the exploitation of plant food from nearby estuaries as well. Here's one of the floors that we excavated. We could only excavate small areas, 1 by 2 meters, 2 by 3 meters, because we're stepping the excavation down. And once you get to that deep level, you can't open up a very big area, of course. You're down 32 meters, and you had to step it down to keep it from being too dangerous for the workers. And here there's a hearth in the upper left-hand corner. It's charcoal from it's dating 14,530 years ago. We've got lithic tools here, flakes mainly, ashy areas, and hematite or red ochre stains as well. What we find in the later burials that come in about 8,000 years ago, it's up in the mound, not in the pre-mound levels, is red hematite associated with burials. So I don't know if there are any human burials at this level. We could not open up enough terrain to see it. The hematite or red ochre could have been used for something else as well. Some of the stone tools associated with this site, they're all unifacial tools. They're taking cobbles and knocking off the edges to produce flakes, as you see on this left-hand side. It's 14,500 to 13,000 plus. And I've indicated the arrows here where these flakes have been struck. And down below it, about 14,000 years ago, are choppers, scrapers as well, punching tools. So exclusively a unifacial industry. We have recovered about 200 flakes. We see no evidence of bifacial flaking at this time period. That doesn't mean that bifaces didn't exist. They could be in the mountains located off to the east, perhaps. Coming down the coastline, another site called Quebrada, Hawaii, excavated by a colleague, 12,600 to about 12,000 calibrated years ago. It's out in the desert near the coast of Peru. Shellfish were found there, and also some terrestrial animal bones. And this site yielded what you see here, these blue areas, postals of a structure at Quebrada, Hawaii. And here down below are some of the lithics associated with it, including a projectile point that's not like fishtail points at all, somewhat similar to the Pai Han point I showed, with these sharply defined shoulders and these long stems coming down from the middle point of the projectile point. And unifaces as well. But again, it's pretty much a maritime adaptation, just as what you see at Huaca Prieta that I showed you in the other slide. Here's another site in Chile, central Chile, just north of Santiago, the capital, out on the coast, called Santa Julia. Dates about 13,200 to 12,600 years ago. Calibrated again, excavated by Chilean Donald Jackson. It's a deeply stratified site. You can see the stratigraphy in the upper and left-hand corner is pretty well defined and pretty much intact. A number of bones of animal, but also sea organisms as well, shells. It's right on the coast, although the coast was further out again at that time, but accessible to these people. And what Jackson found here is the base of a fishtail point, and in this case, it has a longitudinal thinning flake, as you see. It's a fragment only. This is the only site, coastal site in South America that has a fishtail projectile point. They're usually found into the interiors and associated with hunting. Although these projectile points, if along the seacoast, could have been used as for hunting sea lion or even larger animals, small whales off the coastline if people had boats, for instance. So I'm going to jump up into the Andean mountains here in Peru and Bolivia, northern Chile, northwest Argentina, that central section of the Andes on the continent, where there are a number of caves and rock shelters that have been excavated by colleagues. El Inga, Picamachay, Panalauca, 12,800 to 12,000 years ago. And most of these are associated with hunting guanaco. Again, this sort of guanaco is the wild animal that eventually led to domestication along with vicuña of the llama and the alpaca. So it's that camelid in the high Andes. And these are some of the projectile points off to the right that's associated with these highland sites, most of them, again, caves and rock shelters. Upper left-hand corner, you see two projectile points that are of the fishtail type. And then down below, you get these kind of irregularly shaped, more amorphous, subtriangular projectile points, and some of them off to the lower right, elongated as well. And again, you get this kind of diversity of lithic technologies in the Andes early on, unifacial industries plus different kinds of projectile points. And the only one across the continent that is kind of shows up everywhere is the fishtail projectile point, which again, some North American archaeologists see as evidence kind of a Clovis influence, because Clovis kind of spread across most of North America, with the exception of, let's say, California and maybe the Great Basin, where you get the western stem points. So, you know, here's where we come back to this controversy of Clovis and pre-Clovis, and how much are the two continents connected. You also find at these cave sites exploitation of plant material from lagunas and wetland areas. But here, the main economy is hunting wild guanaco and other game as well. So let me move you down into Chile and Monte Verde, where I'm at now. So snow-capped volcanoes, you see two or three in the distance there. The ecology of this region is pretty much like Vancouver and Seattle, cool temperate rainforest. Here's an aerial view of Monte Verde to the right, a small creek running through the area. And I'm going to be mainly talking about Monte Verde 2, dates at 14,500 years ago. So Monte Verde is composed of four sites, what's called MV1. Recently, a road was put into the south of the site. MV2, Chinchihuapi 1, Chinchihuapi 2. I'll focus mainly on Monte Verde 2. It's covered by peat lens that preserved organic material, dates back about 14,500 years ago. In the upper left-hand corner is a schematic drawing of what we found, the remains of two structures that had collapsed and covered over by the peat that preserved organic material. One is a small wishbone-shaped foundation structure you see in the upper right-hand corner. You can see here wood that's preserved pretty well. And the peat lens is that dark band in the base of the excavation that covered over the site and preserved the organic material. If you can see it, I don't know if you can see my pointer, it's showing up for me. There is a square piece to the right side of this structure. That's a chunk of meat that measures 23 by about 25 centimeters in size. It's muscle of Gomphothere or mastodont. So what we see over here in the lower left-hand corner of this upper drawing is kind of a schematic drawing of the way that that structure would have been framed with poles and foundational structures. I'll show you that. So the two structures, this one, which is the wishbone shaped structure, is about 30 meters away from a longer tent-like structure that kind of looks like the artistic reconstruction down below. And the evidence that brought about this artistic reconstruction is derived from the following. When we were excavating, we found these segmented areas defined by trunks that you see off to the left. There's 1, 2, 3, 4 of these, and some on the other side of this main trunk-like structure. And you can see this dark kind of greasy color, grease habitation floor made up of charcoal and carbon and other trash that people left. These foundational structures there were tied down with stakes. You can see in the upper right-hand corner, we're looking into the end of one of these trunks or branches of a tree. And the heads have been flattened, much like tent stakes that we see today. And some of them were tied to the trunk with single and double S nuts. And in this case, this one broke away due to movement of the site. We found more than 65 well-preserved species of edible and medicinal plants scattered amongst the floor of this long tent-like structure. So what you're seeing in the right side there, that little bulb, wild potato. And to the left-hand side, there's a scale there. These are centimeters. We found in that wishbone-shaped structure to the left, the small one, 5 masticated cuds of boldo, a medicinal plant, and also 3 to 4 species of seaweed that have a lot of iodine, and today they're used as medicinal plants as well. So what some people have called kind of a pharmaceutical package. And the size of this thing pretty much fits the upper palate of a human. So we're speculating and hypothesizing that these might be medicinal cuds. Um, this combination of a boldo plant, which is from the interior, along with seaweed, uh, is used today by indigenous people in the area. So we're using an ethnographic analogy to interpret what we're finding archaeologically. So I'm going to pass through a number of slides here. These are some of the knots that we found at Monte Verde that were tying these stakes to those foundational timbers. And in the middle, there's a typical sort of what's called an S-shaped knot. Some of them are double and triple S-shaped, as you see to the lower right-hand corner. This is junco reeds, much like bulrush needs, actually, reeds. All of this is dating 14,500 years ago. So here's these knots again. And what we found in the floor of both of these structures that I pointed out to you are thousands of flecks of skin fragments, 1 millimeter, 2 millimeters in size, that's suggesting to us that, going back to that artistic reconstruction of that tent, it was hide covered. And colleagues who have studied this with us, histologists and animal specialists, think that there might have been a carpeted area inside with skins as well because of so many fragments of skin found on the floors of those two structures. We have found fallen poles at the site, such as this one in the upper left-hand corner, with a section of skin still attached to it and a twisted kind of string passing through it, which we think is indicative of this skin that was overlying this pole frame tent structure. And portions of it were preserved like this over the past 14,000 plus years. We've got a few of them like this where skin is still adhering to some of these fallen, broken poles. Left-hand side, another section of meat, Gomphothere mastodon. And here's a thin section of it over on the right-hand side, microscopically amplified. Again, showing incredibly well preserved here. Some of the woodworking, we've got a number of timbers with square holes in them. Some of these timbers have grooves in them. We don't know what these things are used for. With the kind of a bridge you see in this left-hand side down below, kind of a bridge cutting across that groove. A lot of woodworking going on and holes, and some of this might have been where they were attaching the frame by putting branches through some of these holes and not just tying them together. But so much of this had collapsed, obviously, through time. It's just difficult in some areas to reconstruct everything. We've got fire drills down below where we found the broken shorter sticks with the burned tips to create fire. And here's some of the fire holes that you see here. A number of the stone tools that we found at Monte Verde, unifacial tools and projectile points too. On the edges of the stone tools, you get well-preserved wood, pieces of hide and meat, plant material. And in this case, it's a seaweed called sargassum. And it's on the edge of the tool. And coming down below is that burned seaweed on the left-hand side. We also found in a patch of clay 3 human footprints, the right side left, right footprint, left footprint, right. This is about 11 to 12 centimeters in length. You can see the toe impressions up on the top. This was in a patch of clay next to a hearth. Probably a subadult or maybe just a small adult individual. When we excavated Monte Verde, we had to constantly keep the wood covered up with plastic or we were going to lose it. Once it was exposed out of that peat lens, it would dry out immediately. I had 2 full-time people with buckets taking water from the creek that you see there. and constantly keeping the wood wet, keeping it from drying out. Uh, the original creek bed is out in front about 15 meters away and 2 meters down in elevation. And this is the modern day creek bed going by, which is only a meter or two wide in the summer, expands during the rainy season somewhat, 4 to 5 meters wide. Just showing you down the right-hand corner some of the excavation units. Everybody had their own excavation corridor column. Here's some of the wood preservation we're working with. We constantly had to keep the wood well preserved and then later take it to the laboratory and submit it to propanol alcohol after that. Different baths over 8 months to a year in polyethylene glycol. But it's logistically very difficult to excavate this site, trying to keep that wood preserved throughout the excavations every year that was going on. Some of the lithic tools from Monte Verde. This one in the upper right-hand corner, these are fragments of nearly a complete one here. Bipointed rhomboidal projectile points, very similar in form to what you see at El Hobo up in Venezuela and Colombia. These are down in the right-hand corner here. And this dark piece in the lower right-hand corner is slate drill. We've got hundreds of what called bola stones. Down there, they had the sling stone and bola stone for hunting. These two have grooves in them, as you can see. So they were attached to a string that you would throw. And just the other day, we excavated, I found another projectile point fragment like this that looks much like the El Hobo point or the Monte Verde point that you see here. Lots of flakes for cutting, scraping, gouging. So the animals that we find at Monte Verde, paleo-camelid bones, mastodon. One individual paleo-camelid to the left, we've got 7 individuals of mastodons. 83% of the bones are rib bones. And we think that they're probably the kill sites are somewhere in the distant swamps and marshes, and they're transporting back meat with mainly the ribs. We get some molars at the site too, and the molars, some of the teeth have been broken off and used as tools. So what we get with the diet at Monte Verde II, dated 14,500 years ago, is a broad spectrum diet, not only of these animals, but we've got eggshells as well. We've got more than 60 species of edible plants that's coming from distant marshes, also the nearby forest. These are nuts like chestnuts. There's some fruits, local fruits, and also eating bulbs, wild potatoes, and other plants that are indigenous to this kind of environment. So I'm going to take you briefly through deeper levels of the other site, Monte Verde 1, Chinchihuapi 1. This is about 2 meters in depth. And what we find in these deeper levels, as indicated by these red markings that you see here, are small patches of burned material often associated with clearly worked human worked flakes. And this is dating anywhere from 16 to 18 to 22,000 years ago in these deeper levels. These are some of the flakes clearly worked by humans, as you can see here. Scrapers, end scrapers is here. Drills you see on the lower right, the upper right-hand corner. Here's a burned area and a flake that's associated with it. This stuff is dating mainly between 16 and 18,000 years ago, and I have not committed to it. I think it's inconclusive. We need more evidence to either prove it or disprove it. These burned areas could result from old burning spots resulting from natural fires, but interestingly enough, some of the burned areas, several of them are associated with these stone tools, which is an odd occurrence and co-occurrence. So the evidence is not strong enough to reject these deeper indicators of possible culture or to accept them. We've been spoiled by Monte Verde too with this peatlands that preserved an incredibly beautiful campsite. And if the peat had not been there, what would we have found? Projectile points with mainly bone, a few hearts with carbonized plant material in it. I would have called it maybe a kill site. And people also are eating uh, available comestible plants in the area. But because of the peatlands that preserve the organics, we get a view at a hunting gathering site where people have, again, a broad spectrum economy. So let me push on through a few other things here. I'm going to take you out of Monte Verde now. Let's go into Brazil, and I'm going to take you down the right side of the continent. There's a site in the Amazon. Again, all these Amazon sites are incredibly associated with a lot of rock art. It's an incredible part of the world out in what today is the Amazon. Some of these areas back then would have been a parkland or a savanna-like environment. Some of them would have been in a tropical forest as well, such as those areas in Colombia where you get the palm nuts and the fruits that are carbonized and preserved. I was talking about earlier. In this case, it's along a tributary river of the Amazon, Monte Alegre, 12,800, 12,000 years ago. And on the right, you see what the projectile point is, completely different from fishtail points, Paihan points, Monte Verde points too. So you get this kind of unifacial, bifacial industry that's very different across the continent early on. Other sites out in the Amazon basin, Pedro Furada, claimed to be 25,000 years ago, but this site I've been to it and we published on it and criticized it. Most likely 12, 13,000 years ago as well. Another one out in the Colombian rainforest, Serranía de la Lindosa, about 13,000 years ago as well. A huge outcrop domed rock shelter there. Again, with rock art, and it's associated with a fair amount of hunt indicators that plant material again and hunting small game, in this case out in the jungle, not megafauna, indicating this sort of broad spectrum diet again that's very typical across the continent. Bocareo da Piedra Furada and Valle de Piedra Furada también. Also, these are sites excavated by French Paleolithic experts who have come in, and they're somewhat controversial because they're finding a number of layers of unifacial stone tools dating 20,000 years ago, such as what you see here in this rock shelter. I personally have some problems with it because not all of these sites are associated with hearths. I mean, hearths are features that are usually pretty well preserved. And I'm a big fan of looking for a buried use surface, a surface that people have lived on, and you get a horizontally buried surface where the stone tools and maybe bone and other materials are there. But all of these early Brazilian sites are controversial and at present not widely accepted. Some of the problems is that you've got rock falling from the top of some of these stone outcrops and facings you see. And when they fall, they break up and they often create the kinds of stones that you're seeing here. So this is an issue in eastern Brazil, the Brazilian highlands mainly, that still needs to be resolved. Are these really human-produced sites, or are they sites that are produced by nature? A number of people favor them as early sites and just simply not as well preserved as some of the later sites. There are others who tend to think that these sites are produced by nature itself. It's an open question that requires much more analyses. So what you end up getting across the continent are a wide diversity of acceptable sites and at present unacceptable sites. Here's a site in Uruguay, and excavated by a number of colleagues, dating 12,000, 11,000 years ago, with an incredible array of fishtail projectile points. Here we're moving into the grasslands of Uruguay and Argentina, much like the Great Plains of the U.S. And here they're hunting wild guanaco and other animals, deer, and so on and so forth. So there are areas beyond this sort of broad spectrum diet that we see in areas of the Andes and the marine kind of diet that you see along the Pacific coast of South America too. And the kind of broad spectrum economy of these sites in the semi-tropical, tropical lowlands of South America. So there's a few places where we do indeed get a typical kind of hunting tradition, such as what you see here with these fishtail projectile points. And this is mainly in the grasslands of South America. Here's a site, Arroyo Seco, dated 14,200, 14,000 years ago. Here they're hunting wild guanaco, the wild camelid. It's in the grasslands, as you see, of Argentina here. Unifacial stone tools, but there's probably projectile points there to have killed these animals. They just have not yet been found. So all these sites, like sites in North America, have sampling biases of what's found and not found. What are the expectations? How are those expectations met or not met? And then we move down into Tierra del Fuego and southern Patagonia. This is a famous site of Junius Bird, Fells Cave, as you see here. And this is where the first fishtail points were found by him back in the 1940s. And they were radiocarbon dated in the 50s and later as well. When these radiocarbon dates started coming out at 12,800 now calibrated years, Bird could have made a decision and said, you know, this is 200 and 300 years off of 13,000-year-old Clovis points. He tended to favor a movement of Clovis all the way down into the southern tip of South America based on associating fishtail points with Clovis points. And so coming back briefly to that argument, as you've seen, and I'm only presenting a fraction of the evidence, there are a number of sites legitimately dating around 12,500, 12,800 years ago, 200, 300, 400 years younger than Clovis in North America. And there's 4 or 5 sites legitimately found at 14,500, 14,000 years ago. But even if you look at the majority of these sites dating around 12,800, 12,500 years ago, it's nearly impossible to get people from North America down into the tip of South America in 200 or 300 years, even if they're going to the coast, along the coastline, which is kind of what John Ehrlichson's called the kelp highway. People just don't move that fast, and they're probably not just moving north to south. They're back migrating. They're cutting up rivers to the east and west, laterally cutting here or there. So it's never made a lot of sense to a lot of people, including myself, that Clovis could have inhabited the continent and that some of these sites at 12.8, 12.5 as a result of a Clovis migration. To us in South America, it just makes no sense whatsoever. So we just see the South being inhabited by people from the North, obviously, as indicated by archaeology, cranial evidence, and genetics, but not by Clovis people. It had to have been before that. So down here in southern Patagonia, you get a number of archaeological sites, caves and rock shelters, unifaces, projectile points. Some of them are fishtails. Some of them are other kinds of projectile points as well. And these are mainly, again, we're talking about grasslands, and we're talking about people hunting different animals, mainly wild guanaco again. So let me kind of finish the talk on some of these ending points once again that I've been discussing. I kind of wanted to leave you with the idea that there's a wide diversity of archaeological sites across the continent. There are huge gaps across the geographical areas where there's no information whatsoever. There are not as many archaeologists working on the continent as what you get in North America, for instance. And especially once you get out into the Amazon basin, the archaeological visibility, other than outside of rock shelters and caves, is minimal, is difficult in that dense forest. But it's much more visible along the Pacific coast, in the desert, and up in the highlands. And most of these sites are rock shelters and caves. They're easier to find and easier to excavate than open air sites in some ways. But it's very clear that we don't have the so-called hunting Paleo-Indian phase, what we call again the Proto-Archaic phase of a broad spectrum economies. And all of these sites are indicating that. The only thing that would be a Paleo-Indian hunting phase would be down in the grasslands, the Pampa Patagonian areas of South America. So this debate of pre-Clovis and Clovis with colleagues in South America, they just don't pay much attention to it. They think it's a North American thing. And one of the other things that we get in South America that North Americans have not paid that much attention to, very small ephemeral sites, small campsites, with projectile points and a single hearth, even in caves and rock shelters in the deeper levels. Much like what I was explaining for the deeper levels at Monte Verde 1, dated 16, 18,000 years ago, which might be cultural, maybe it's not. That's yet to be determined. But people have this expectation that sites should be something like Clovis or Lindenmeyer or other sites where massive set of bones spread out with large numbers of lithic materials. But there were instances, surely, when there was just these small campsites, small groups of people staying overnight with one hearth, leaving just a small amount of trash behind, these ephemeral sites. And these need more attention throughout the hemisphere, as well as other areas of the world, too. Another point here is that we don't see across the continent what you sort of regionally see in the US, where you get Clovis followed by Folsom, Clovis followed by Dalton, and other sequences like that. We just get kind of a mixed blend of everything appearing here and there. So that kind of pattern just doesn't show up as yet in South America. And finally, you know, tremendous number of plants were domesticated early on in South America, and mainly on the edges of the Amazon rainforest, what would have been semi-tropical lowland areas. We're talking about tomato and chili pepper, and the Andes, potatoes, of course. There's now an Amazonian rice that's been found to have been domesticated. Peanuts, corn came in from Mexico later on, but a number of other plants as well. So plants, particularly fruits and nuts, palm nuts, played an important role in these tropical lowland cultures early on. And along the Pacific coast, from Ecuador all the way down to southern Chile, sea lions and marine foods also played an extremely important role as well. So I'm going to leave you with that. There are similarities with North America, and there are a great number of dissimilarities as well. And we've got a long way to go to study the continent, huge gaps there, but it's an incredible story, the peopling of the last place on Earth where people moved into. So it's kind of the caboose of the human migration across the planet. So I will stop there and thank you for your attention. And there may be some questions.
It's overwhelming. There's so much information you just gave us. I'm sure that's why everybody's quiet.
Good job. Quick comment and then a question, I guess. I like right at the beginning, you gave a quick summary of the difference between North American and South American archaeology. That was interesting and a good way to start out. And then question, in the US, a lot of archaeology gets funded when somebody wants to build a freeway or build a housing development. What drives it in South America?
Well, the funding is not as abundant as what you get in North America. There's cultural resource management, impact archaeology, let's say. But most of that's limited as to highways, pipelines, so forth. But some countries such as Chile and Argentina have something set up like National Science Foundation to fund work, but not at the level of what we have. A lot of these sites have been funded in South America by Wintergren Foundation, National Geographic Society in the US. And people's universities too.
Let me check on the chat. One question I saw in the chat, early on in your presentation, you were talking about the migration of peoples. So a question here. So no major moves from South America to North America or from across the Pacific?
We have no evidence for movement across the Pacific, no. I mean, that's going to require a boat, and for a population to survive, both male and female, you're going to need fresh water and a sturdy boat.
Yes.
Dr. Dillehay, you had one slide that showed a lot of points with a brown lithic material. Brown, was that like a jasper? Is that what they were?
Some of it's silex, some of it's jasper as well. Some of it's a red chalcedony.
Mhm.
It depends on where it's coming from, of course.
Another question on the chat. What kind of wood was used?
Mainly hardwoods, but the soft woods that are flexible in the winds were used as the poles on that tent structure I showed. But mainly hardwoods, what down there is called luma and canelo, used as firewood.
Mhm.
They were using 17 different species of wood.
Well, are there any other questions?
Few more on the chat.
Okay.
Go through them real quick. Were any fish or waterfowl remains found at Monte Verde?
No, but they seem to have been beachcombers because we've got some fossils at the site, marine fossils found in the cliffs out toward the ocean. And then they were picking up at least 16 species of seaweeds. So I don't think that they had a fishing technology, but they seem to have had a beachcomber, sort of adventurous economy, let's say.
Okay.
No fish hooks or anything.
Did you find any human remains? It doesn't seem as though you talked about much.
No, no human remains. You know, as some of you probably well know, I mean, human remains for this early period is almost non-existent. You get a little bit at Spirit Cave in the U.S., out in the Great Basin, Anzac Site, Child. South America, there's one skeleton that dates around 11,000 years ago. Brazil, Lagoa Santa. But we just don't know what the mortuary pattern was for these people. So when people died, did they toss them into a creek or in a river, bury them in a sand dune, cremate them? Who knows? But what we do have are those human footprints.
Yeah, you'd think there would be a stray tooth once in a while.
Uh, don't get them. I'm getting straight teeth at the Huaca Prieta site, but we didn't not get them at Monte Verde.
I have a question, and it's relative to the Neanderthal, the Denisovian, and the shared. Could you explain that a little bit more? Because you had Brazil and Peru, and there were some different pie charts.
Yeah, it looks like based on different migrations. I mean, there probably was not just one migration of people coming into the Americas and going down into Central and South America. What some colleagues like David Meltzer and others have called a drip-like pattern through time. People moving around, drifting here, moving through, multiple migrations, multiple routes, so on and so forth. So at one point, people coming in with a greater number of Neanderthal genes had crossed into South America, and at another point, the Denisovian genes were coming in, probably with another group. And that mixture that was pointed out, which was more dominant than one isolated group as Neanderthal or Denisovan, as opposed to the others, the admixture could come from two things. A third group came in that had the admixture, or once they reached the continent, they had bred and admixed as well. We just don't know.
So are they kind of using the admixture on where was the migration and what direction the migration might have taken?
Yeah, it seems like the Denisovan migration, once coming into the continent, took off to the Atlantic side, and that the Neanderthal side came down the spine of the Andes or the Pacific coast.
Okay. Thank you.
So different migrations, different groups, and it's interesting because I've been in that Darien Strait, as they call it, which is hot, humid, difficult, even back then. And there's one river going through there. No one has ever done any archaeology in that area. So the key is that tiny little bottleneck, Panama coming into Colombia.
Mhm. Mhm. Hmm.
Yeah,
You,
continue.
you, everything you showed was very utilitarian. You didn't find anything decorative or like beads or turquoise that we're so used to finding here.
No, though I do have a colleague at a site in Chile, and that site dates around nearly 12,000 years ago. And there were geometric designs cut on an animal bone. And so that would be the only secure artistic, let's say, sort of design, aesthetics design on something that early. However, again, going back to the rock art, there are colleagues who think that some of the rock art dates to the late Pleistocene period at a number of these sites. And what's been found in some of these rock shelters and caves is that down in the deeper levels, at 11,000, 11,500, 12,500, you do find fragments of rock that's been painted and at a depth maybe of a meter or more. So how did that get there? Was it something that fell off the wall at that time, or as a result of later occupations, these painted fragments made its way down into those deeper dated levels? But I suspect some of that rock art could be pretty old, going back 12, maybe 13,000 years ago. It's just difficult to date.
Okay,
Okay.
I'll
Any
press.
any other questions or?
Looks like two. Any thoughts on the White Sands, New Mexico human footprints in association with ground sloth footprints?
Well, it's more work needs to be done to associate those together. Imagine soft sand and a person maybe weighing 90 to 120, 30 pounds walking across soft sand as opposed to an animal that weighs maybe 2 tons. So the footprint of that animal is going to sink a lot deeper than the human. So there's association problems at different levels and dating problems with the Tularosa site. I've been down there. I mean, I live in Santa Fe, so it's nearby. We'll see how that turns out in the future. They're doing more work.
We've had two speakers from that area recently. Are there any divers working in the offshore in South America?
There are along the coast of Peru mainly because at that point in time, the coastline, the continental shelf was not that far out. Like at Huaca Prieta's site, I pointed out, the coastline was only 16 kilometers away, 16, 18 kilometers away. That's pretty close by. Uh, there are no divers working in that area, but they're beginning to work in other areas, mainly Australians doing that work.
I have a question about palynological reconstructions. Are there any palynologists working? Are there any phytosociologists talking about plant distribution that are new to the environment?
Yeah, I mean, like at Monte Verde and my digs in Huaca Prieta, I've got more than 100 specialists involved because of the preservation. Parasitologists, sedimentologists, geneticists, on and on and on. So yeah, there's a lot of paleontologists involved, botanists, everybody else. Uh, we found some new plant species that have disappeared since the Pleistocene period, mainly bulbular plants from marshes and wetlands at Monte Verde, but other colleagues are finding things too that's new, let's say, at least new to that area.
Okay. Questions keep coming. What are indigenous South American attitudes to providing DNA for analysis and allowing analysis of any remains found?
Well, in South America, the indigenous groups are not as far along, let's say, politically in contesting some of these issues, such as using DNA, because most of them are involved with other issues, such as access and rights to their lands, human rights issues. So a few groups, the problem of access to human blood for DNA analysis are using ancient burials 8 to 9,000 years ago is just now really coming onto the horizon and being discussed and contested, but not at the depth and breadth that you see in North America.
Understand? Thank you for a great talk. Question. Would you say that the presumed conflict between North and South American archaeologists is real? You hinted a bit on it, but is it, quote, as bad as one often reads online?
No, you see a shift at the Society of American Archaeology meetings where there's no longer a symposium of quote unquote Clovis first symposium. One of the nice things with the demise, near death, let's say, but demise of Clovis first is that new questions have come forward where people are asking, they're moving away from chronology, not completely, of course, and asking new questions about migration, technology, internal structure of sites, linking genetics mainly to archaeology. So I think it's an exciting moment where the field has opened up greatly, and the younger generations are coming on, and some of them paying less attention to this old debate of Clovis, pre-Clovis.
Okay. And one more here. I heard you on a podcast recently. I think it was on the ancients, where you sounded somewhat more convinced about Monte Verde 1. Could you elaborate a bit more about it, please?
Well, we've gone back and excavated. I'm doing it right now. I'm into Monte Verde 1. We found a few more lithics, a few more burn spots. And I'm beginning to think more positively that people probably could have come through there at 16 to 18,000 years ago. Small groups staying 1 or 2 days, creating this ephemeral archaeological record. We just can't dismiss it because some of those stone tools at those levels are clearly human made. And clearly, right in the middle of some of these burn spots, and some of these tools are actually slightly burned themselves and associated with burned chestnut seeds. And we've got the knee of an American horse we found in one of the burn spots. So the evidence is beginning to look a little more solid. And, it may well be that these presumed earlier sites in Brazil and a few other places on the continent where these French specialists have come into Brazil and talking about 25,000 years ago. Maybe indeed people were here that old. And some of the talk here on the continent is that if you look at the map, there's very close spatial linkage between the western corner of Africa and the delta area of Brazil, the elbow of Brazil and the elbow of Africa. And if you look at the ocean currents coming off the elbow of Africa, they come right into the elbow and then the delta of the Amazon River. So there's highly speculative discussion of maybe there was some contact between Africa at some point in South America that might account for some of these earlier sites in Brazil. I'm not willing to open the door on that, but I'll keep my hand on the doorknob and keep to maybe slightly open it at some point.
Never say never.
Yeah, that's dangerous.
Yes. And one final question here. What about pottery?
No, not at that time period, but the earliest pottery in America is coming out of the Amazon basin when it was a true dense Amazon forest. And it's dating back to several places, 8,000, 8,500 years ago. And it seems to be associated with this sort of breakout of domestication of a lot of these plants that's beginning to take place 10, 12,000 years ago. At Huaca Prieta, we've got avocado, undomesticated, wild avocado, wild squash, wild chili peppers, dating at 10,500 years ago. All three of those plants are coming out of the Amazon basin at that time, up and over the Andes and to the Pacific coast, which indicates a tremendous amount of movement of people, ideas, technologies, and plants as well.
Thank you. Back to you, Joe.
Okay. Thank you very much, Dr. Dillehay, for tonight's presentation. It was very interesting. I'm sure everybody enjoyed it. And good luck with your dig tomorrow.
Well, thank you. Thank you for inviting me.
And I'm going to
Good
be
questions.
sending you the certificate of appreciation to you in the mail. And I just want to make an announcement for next month. It's going to be Dr. Green, Yerlicky Green, and she's going to be talking about the Moquaqua Valley in Peru during the Middle Horizon, 600 to 100 AD. It's going to be, it'll be by Zoom and it might be in person too. We're still working that out, but pay attention to either the website or your newsletter and we'll update you on that. But anyway, I will say goodnight to you and to everybody. Thank you for joining us and have a nice Thanksgiving.
Goodbye, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night. Thank you very much. Good job.